It's out of nowhere offenses and defenses today, Derek. We're not doing top 10s this year for a few different reasons. I just wanted to kind of drift away from that. We've done fewer lists on the show overall as part of our offseason programming. But when we used to do top 10 offenses and defenses, to me, the best part of those shows was picking like the 2 or 3 units that had no business as part of the conversation, the ones that weren't the easy teams to land on. And so this show is essentially, it's like when you eat a cupcake and it's only the top only the part on the top with the frosting. Like that's what we're doing here. We're just doing solely the best part of something we already enjoyed. So we're going to throw out, 6, 8 units that are going to come out of nowhere potentially, are candidates to be top 10 units this year on offense and defense.
Listen, man, we've done months and months of off-season content. I think we get a little bit of let's just have the icing. Let's just have some fun here.
I'd love doing this because, again, every year where I think you had the Lions last year in your top 10.
I did.
I had the Panthers in my top 10 defenses. And defenses is easier, and I think we'll talk about that today because there's just more volatility. Like there are more defenses that are going to surprise you from season to season than offenses typically, even though last year is kind of an exception. But most of the time, there are more defenses that are going to be able to jump from the bottom half of the league into the top 10. So we each had one of those last year, and so that's what this entire show is going to be. Just teams that we think could make a big leap and surprise some people as top 10 units on either side of the ball. Let's start with offenses. I'm curious who your first candidate is here to jump from, let's say, outside of the top 15 into the top 10, and you pick your metric, whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, my first one is definitely cheating because the quarterback missed half the season, but they had a million problems even when he was out there. The Dallas Cowboys, to me, feel like I'm still kind of buying it.
It's the cheapest one. It's the cheapest one.
I want to start with the cheapest one so we can get to the fun ones later. You know, I gotta get off my Dak Prescott love beforehand. But he's like, when he's healthy and has like literally anyone other than CeeDee Lamb to throw to, I think we've seen that they're a top 8 passing offense pretty much year in and year out. I expect the offensive line to take some degree of jump just because I think they have a lot of young, interesting players, but also they've now hired Clayton Adams, so I think we are both excited about and really loved a lot of what he did in Arizona. So if he can fix the run game, they were one of the worst run games in the NFL last year. Even when Dak was healthy and like had the threat of the passing attack, they were terrible. And so if they can at least, the blocking can be a little bit better. Maybe that feels like a more cohesive unit. The concepts are a little bit more interesting. The floor of the offense raises. And then I think the ceiling is raised by hopefully healthy Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb, when he's playing, is a top 5 NFL receiver probably still. And then they now brought in George Pickens, who is pretty clearly the best Cowboys wide receiver 2 in like 3 or 4 seasons, which I think
since
really
Michael
goes
Gallup,
a long
right?
way.
Since Michael Gallup was like actually Michael Gallup, it has been that long.
Which was what, 2022?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
2021 maybe? Like it's been a long time, exactly.
It has been a good chunk of time since this team had like a real boundary X receiver for Dak Prescott to just like throw stop routes and perimeter throws to, the type of which he wants to throw. Like he wants a guy that he could just give those opportunities. And I think there are a few players with that archetype more than George Pickens has it. And so I'm excited for that. Like I think the volatility of George Pickens has to play into what you gave up for him. Like there's real downside to that move, but there's also real upside to it. So Dak, those 2 pass catchers, Jake Ferguson is like a complimentary third pass catcher. I think you can easily talk yourself into that. For me, this is all about what happens with the offensive line. Like that is going to determine what drives this offense. You already have Tyler Guyton missing a good chunk of time. Terrence Steele is already banged up at right tackle. They don't have very good tackle depth on this team. Robert Jones, who was their guard depth, he's going to miss a huge chunk of time. So if Guyton can get back, and if we can see a step forward from him and a couple of the younger guys, that Tyler Booker hits the ground running, I'm with you. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we woke up on Halloween and this was the 8th best offense in the league.
Yeah, it's definitely banking on a young offensive line, which that's always scary. I mean, I think we tried to do that with the Jets last year, and for a number of reasons that I don't think was necessarily the offensive line's fault, that all fell apart. But I think those other factors I don't expect to necessarily be an issue in Dallas with, the way the quarterback and the way the offense I think is going to be structured. The last thing I do want to say that does have me excited, and I think is the reason I've really bought in a little bit more on the George Pickens move. Over the last, I think, 2 seasons, we've gotten a lot more of CeeDee Lamb playing outside, and he's been really, really good at that. It's been like the huge development in his game as he's gone from mostly a slot player to a guy who's played a lot outside more and gotten better at it than he was early in his career. at the same time, he's still better when he's from the slot. Like, he's
Yeah.
just better on all those deep crossers and those seam routes and stuff like that. And so if we can have a guy like George Pickens where we just feel really comfortable that he can be our X and we don't need CeeDee Lamb to do as much of that, I think that's how you get a little bit back to accessing some of the explosive potential in the passing offense that I think they really struggled to find last year and even at certain points the year before, even though I know they were still a very good offense.
Two things I want to mention about this team before we move on. There's been something that's come up a lot in conversation, and I think as I've listened to a lot of fantasy content over the course of the last few weeks, getting ready for like my own fantasy drafts, people I really love and people whose information is fantastic. There's just been kind of this blanket assumption that this team is going to throw the ball a ton. And I understand that based on what they've done over the last few years under McCarthy and the fact that Jaden Blue is potentially their best running back. But I also think there's some signal to kind of push us in a slightly different direction. Like adding Clayton Adams as your offensive coordinator and what that is going to potentially do to the run game. That's something I would pay attention to. And also, the last time we saw Brian Schottenheimer as an offensive coordinator, like when he was in Seattle, those teams were incredibly run heavy. And I know that was probably some Pete Carroll driving that sort of offensive identity, but let's listen, maybe they throw the ball 62% of the time and this all seems silly, but I think there's enough to make us believe that they may not be that pass heavy given some of the moves they made this offseason and given the history of Schottenheimer as a play caller when we've actually seen him in that role.
I kind of agree with you. And I think one, you have the precedent, right? Like we've seen Dak Prescott operate an offense like this and operated at a very high level. And also when your other major move this offseason in terms of player personnel is getting a wide receiver, I think it's very easy to make the assumption that we're just going to throw the piss out of the ball. I'm kind of with you, though. I wouldn't be surprised if with bringing in Clayton Adams, you draft a guard in the first round, that they want to be, I think the passing concepts would look different, but in terms of balance and what they're trying to be, like something closer to the Sean Payton Broncos, like that more style of trying to find balance in the offense. So, again, there's a chance that they're just throwing the hell out of the ball and they're fourth in passing attempts by the end of the year. And maybe the defense actually forces them into that more than the offensive play calling. But I do think that there's a chance that they're a much more balanced unit than it feels like they should be when you look at the running back talent.
That's probably what I would say. I think more balanced than it might seem at first glance. I wouldn't be shocked if that's how it ended up settling. I was just looking at the numbers while you were talking. In 2020, the Seahawks were 19th in pass rate, just in rushing rate overall. In 2019, they were 6th. So mixed bag. It was actually a below average rate last time we saw Schottenheimer as a play caller. So it's not like his entire Seattle tenure was like that. And I think just overall, the offense is going to feel more dynamic than it's felt in years past when it was a little bit more static under McCarthy. I think we're going to see more motion. I think we're going to see a lot more dynamic run concepts overall, like getting a fullback involved. The way that they're going to use the tight ends in the run game, I think is something that is going to be interesting and different. And the last part of this, I do think is notable with the Tyler Guyton injury specifically. Clayton Adams is somebody that when they went to Arizona, they had this really diverse run game. They were doing all this different stuff, all these gap scheme runs. They didn't know they were going to do that heading into that season. That's something they learned over time. And I think that's the case with a lot of offensive line coaches and run game coordinators. You come into a year thinking, all right, this is my background. These are the things I want to do. And then you learn about your personnel as it goes. That, maybe more than anything, is why the Tyler Guyton injury sucks. Because when I was there on July 25th, talking to them about what they wanted the structure of the run game to look like, I think the answer, truthfully, was we're not sure yet. We haven't seen these guys in pads. We don't know what they can do. And now you're missing all of that experimental time with Guyton specifically. And so I think the fact that they're not going to be able to work out some of those kinks, really be able to learn about their players, figure out what they do well, I think that's going to set this run game back a little bit as they head into the season, just because this is year one under this regime.
And that's especially troubling with a player like Guyton, right? Where coming out of college and then even after 1 year of NFL play, I don't think, even if they watched every snap of him coming into this offseason, I don't know if you could have had a good idea of what you thought that he was going to be. Whereas I think, I don't know, you look at the Chargers with Joe Alton. It's like if a new run game coordinator had come in there, you know what you can get out of Joe Alt. Whereas I think with Guyton, it was always going to be more of a, we still need to wait and see. And so it is pretty unfortunate that they're not going to get him, especially, again, next to a bunch of other younger players on that offensive line. Like the rest of the interior is basically like I don't know, the oldest guy's what? Tyler Smith is probably 25, 26. Like, it's a very young unit.
Yeah, and I think with Guyton's movement skills, you can weaponize him in the run game. You can try some
Mhm.
different things with him. And the fact that they're not going to be able to troubleshoot any of that heading into the year, just something to keep an eye on. My first one here, since you took the cheap one, is not a cheap one at all, considering this team finished 31st in offensive DVOA last season. I'm going with the Tennessee Titans.
Oh, you went the complete opposite direction. I love listen, as a Cam Ward enjoyer, I love this, but I do want to hear the spiel here.
Here's what this is rooted in. When we're trying to figure out which teams are going to take a massive leap, quarterback changes are typically at the center of this. Quarterback, offensive coordinator. And I think there's going to be a decent amount of these in whatever offenses we throw out. But just as much as the Cam Ward part of this, the Titans have like a definitively good offensive line when everybody is healthy. They went from a bottom 5 offensive line last year, in part because the right side was an absolute mess, and you had J.C. Latham figuring out left tackle while never having to do that. Plus, you lose Lloyd Cushenberry for half the season. And so you've got like 1.5 quality starters on that offensive line for the Titans last year. Cushenberry is still hurt. Bill Callahan talked to reporters yesterday. I believe that he's going to hopefully start working in next week. They have joint practices, I think, against the Bucks at the end of next week. And so hopefully he's going to start doing a little bit of individual work. It sounds like he could be ready for week 1. So if Cushenberry is back and healthy, and now you have Skoronski at left guard, who has really come into his own. You have Dan Moore at left tackle, which Dan Moore at left tackle is fine. That is what they paid for, was fine left tackle play. You have Kevin Zeitler coming in at right guard, and now you have J.C. Latham moving to his more natural position at right tackle. And beyond that, something that I really have come to appreciate in talking to a lot of offensive coordinators, offensive line coaches over the last couple of weeks is just what the guy next to you does for your development. And now having J.C. Latham play next to Kevin Zeitler, who's been in the league for 13 years, he was talking to Buck Reesing. It was a member of the Nashville media this week, and he was telling a story, J.C. Latham was, about a certain look that the Titans defense gave him, where Jeffrey Simmons was lined up on the edge, and Zeitler was out. And so at the snap, Jeffrey Simmons cracks down and ear holes the guard as part of a game, and Latham didn't see it coming. And afterwards, Zeitler was talking to him, and he's like, when they're in that sort of look, that's a game look. You have to be able to help out your guard in a moment like that. And Latham was like, he's just telling me stuff like that every single day. And so that, I think, accentuates and accelerates your development as a young player, being able to play next to somebody like that. So this being like a defined top 10 offensive line, that's just as much a part of my enthusiasm for what this group can be as the introduction of Cam Ward is.
I get all of that because that was the part that I think when I looked at the Titans roster immediately after the draft and trying to do just immediately like gut check, how do I feel compared to when you can marinate on it through mid-July and all that stuff. I really started to come around on the offensive line because I think if Dan Moore had been on this offensive line last year, I don't know, he would have been probably given some of the injuries and stuff like that, probably their third best offensive lineman. When I think if Dan Moore is your third best offensive lineman, that's not the greatest spot to be in, but he could potentially, as we've talked about before, he might be their worst offensive lineman now if everyone's healthy, which if he's your worst offensive lineman, you're probably in a pretty good spot. And I'm so glad you mentioned like Latham getting to play next to more of a veteran this year because Skoronski, I think, is a fine player, but Latham having to switch sides last year and then also play next to a very young player with their starting center out for a lot of the season, it's just like, and a quarterback who I don't think was really helping them in terms of setting their protections and really making sure everybody knows what's going on. It's just like he's kind of just swimming and hoping that physically he could get it done. And you saw some of the flashes, but again, it was a little bit more up and down than you want. So I'm very bullish on where I think the offensive line is going. And if they can get a little bit more balance in the run game and not have to make Cam Ward be a superhero and like actually give him a little bit more of, it's not going to be 2016 Dak Prescott, but if you can at least give him some degree of help where he just doesn't have to feel like a hero all the time and throw some of the ridiculous interceptions in the second quarter the way he did in college, then I do think that this could go a pretty long way. My question for you is, I know when we talked about this offense before, you were not as sold on the pass catchers. So how do we
I'm
feel
still not.
this factors into this?
Let's be clear about this.
Okay.
I'm still not. That is the one reservation I have about this, is just the pass catching depth. They coming into camp, just based on how the spring had gone and how the first few days of training camp had gone, we're pretty bullish on what that group could look like by the end of last season. Like, I think there's a world and there's a path where Calvin Ridley's Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley's still a good player. And I think Calvin Ridley is actually going to be really productive
He had
this
1,000
year.
yards last year. I think if
Yes,
you ask most people if he had 1,000 yards, like most people would tell you absolutely not.
just in a nightmarish scenario, like a truly nightmarish scenario. So I think everything about the improved ecosystem, I think Calvin Ridley has a chance to be really productive this year. Like where he's going in fantasy drafts, I think is a little bit later than he should be. I think that's going to be a value because everything else is just going to be so much better. The younger guys, I think, are going to have a chance by the end of the season. And how much they get from those guys by the end of the year, I think, is going to be the biggest question. Like DK, Ayamanor, like, what can they be by the end of year one? I don't think they have to be great for this to be a surprisingly good offense. Like, think about Washington last year. Like they got by with McLaurin and not much else. So if they can run the ball efficiently, if Calvin Ridley can be really good, and if Cam Ward can definitively be like a top half of the league starter from day one, I just think that there is a chance this unit could like really surprise some people, be like a back half of the top 10, knocking on the door of the top 10 sort of unit if it all breaks right.
That's a good point. Like Cam Ward, because he's not the runner Jaden Daniels is, probably it probably doesn't have the ceiling that Washington's offense did last year. But in terms of the pass catches, you're kind of right. Like Ridley is probably he's a tier below Terry McLaurin, I would say, at his best. But also to me, Tyler Lockett is better than any of the other wide receiver twos that we were seeing out of Washington last year. So that like kind of helps bridge the gap a little bit there. So I do think if Cam Ward is the player that we want him to be, which I still think he is, man. I think this is like weirdly the most bored that we've ever been of a number one pick at quarterback, which I just find bizarre, especially given the way that he plays, right? Like, it's not like no shade to him. I think we appreciate the player he's become, but like Jared Goff was a boring first overall pick because he just like played in this air raid offense. He didn't run. Nothing physically about him was that interesting. He was just like we hope we hit a double here. And they did. The Rams hit a double. The Cam Ward thing is like he plays like an insane person. He plays like Mahomes. He plays like Josh Allen. And so he has the big arm. He played in some insane games in college. And it's just like kind of bizarre to me that he, in some ways, as the first overall pick, just kind of we just don't care about him. Maybe it's more of a Titans thing than a Cam Ward thing, but I don't know.
I think that's part of it. I think it was a down top of the draft, and I think there was so much talk about Shedeur heading into the draft that it overshadowed what was going on with Cam Ward. And I'm completely with you because I think his style of play is actually very fun. I will say, and again, I was there 3-4 days into training camp. They're really excited about Cam Ward. And not just from the physical side of it. You know, I think what they've been able to put on him mentally and what he's able to handle, the coaches have come away really impressed with that. This is something where Brian Callahan's background, just the way that he's handled quarterbacks, they're giving him everything mentally, all the toolboxes to change protections, just all the stuff that you need to work with as a quarterback, because I think their thought is we want him to have everything available to him at the line of scrimmage, because if he isn't able to handle that, then you're leaving yourself at a disadvantage. And I think there are elements of Cam Ward's game, and I'm not comparing him to Joe Burrow, and I don't think Brian Callahan would compare him to Joe Burrow. But I think the one thing that is a through line between those guys is that there's just like a spatial awareness of what the totality of the defense looks like. And you can feel defenders in space. And Joe Burrow is, I think, better at that than anybody. And I think Cam Ward showed a real ability to do that in college. It's something like the hole shots where he feels body language from defenders and is really willing to take chances because of that. And I think they've seen that a little bit in practice. There was a play early in training camp where they were working on how to call and check protections against certain looks, and he got fooled by a cover 0 blitz that like snapped out into a cover 2 look. And after the play, he was like, I should have known because the corners were looking at me and not their receivers on that play. And so just that level of awareness and the scope that he's able to play with, like how much of the defense and the details he's able to see, that was one of his strengths in college. And I think that's already manifesting in what they've seen from early practices.
That's extremely cool to hear, because that really is one of the things that I loved about him coming out of college. Like, I think like the hole shots is a good example, because I think good quarterbacks might see like, okay, the safety got X amount of depth on a cover 2 thing. I probably shouldn't throw this cover 2 hole. But a guy like Cam Ward, a guy like Joe Burrow, the truly the best quarterbacks in the league will be like, well, if his shoulders are tilted a little bit too far inside, he's going to have a little bit of trouble flipping his hips. And I have a 5-yard window here where if I really rip the shit out of this, I can actually make this throw. And obviously you're going to get burned doing that because sometimes the defenders, especially in the NFL, are also paid to bait you in that way and make you make those throws. But I do think in the long run, it's absolutely going to work out for him. So that's very cool to hear that anecdote. I love that.
There are certain concepts that are already in the Titans offense that he really liked running in college. And the difference between how he ran them in college and how they're running them is that in college, he read them top to bottom and not bottom to top. And so there are concepts that they're using in Tennessee that they're having to kind of raid him in a little bit, where it's like, I know you want to take the shot. Let's take a couple more layups here. And it's just fun when you have a quarterback with that mindset. And if you watch Cam Ward in college, it was obvious that that's how he always wanted to play. And he's already brought that exact approach to the position as he stepped into this offense. So I think this is a group last year that shot itself in the foot as much as any offense I've ever watched. They were 31st in the NFL in EPA lost on turnovers. They were dead last in the NFL and EPA lost on aborted snaps. They got sacked at just an insane rate. Like when you line up all of the improvements with the likelihood that they just won't step on as many rakes this year, I feel like this offense, if Cam Ward is pretty good from day one, could really surprise a lot of people.
I think so too. I'm very excited about it. And again, he's going to step on some rakes as well. But last year, the theory with Will Levis was like, okay, he'll step on some rakes, but also he'll do some really cool stuff. The cool stuff just didn't happen very much. With Cam Ward, I have a higher degree of certainty that he's going to give us some of the cool stuff.
What's your next one here? Your next out of nowhere potential offense for 2025.
I'm going to be honest with the offenses. I really struggled not to pick a lot of the ones that just felt kind of easy and kind of cheap. So my other cheap and easy one
most of the other ones I have are easy and cheap. Like I had 5 total that I was like, all right, we can throw these out. I only have 2 that are like, all right, that's a spicy one. The Cowboys and then 2 other ones I had. I was like, yeah, these are the obvious ones. So I'm curious if you had the same obvious ones.
Which I'm assuming one of them is the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yes.
It has to be one of those.
Like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the other one. And this, I'm really excited for this for a lot of reasons. One, you mentioned the easiest way to pick these is like change at quarterback. You just did it with the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, Geno Smith to me is like one of those like borderline top 10 quarterbacks. I think he still played really well last year despite all of the things that were going on in the Seattle offense. So I think bringing him in does a lot for them. I truly think they have the best tight end in the league already. I think Brock Bowers is like a special player. Ashton Genty, he's a rookie, so we don't always know what that type of stuff. But I do think the rookie running backs that are drafted top 10, those guys are usually exactly as good as you want them to be. And I also think just the gap from, even if he's just a B+ level player, they had like D+ level running backs last year. So the gap
D+ is very
probably
generous.
Yeah, that's pretty generous. They were the worst run game in the league, and the offensive line wasn't that bad. So it's very clearly like a running back issue. So if he gives them something, that goes a long way. I still think Jacoby Myers is good. And then the last thing to me, and this is a little bit playing to like my own, I'm being a meme of myself. I think Michael Mayer is a really good player, and I'm like kind of buying a lot of the stuff that they're saying about him. Like I really think last year was just a weird aberration for him.
Yeah, I think that entire offense last year was working through a lot. It was just the whole thing was a mess. Like there's just no way around it. The whole thing was a mess. Everything about what they did over the last couple of years was a mess. And so them getting just a more buttoned up offensive approach under Chip Kelly, I think they could live in 12 personnel with those 2 guys. And I think that's probably their best personnel group right now. I think Jacoby Myers is a good player. Like I think Jacoby Myers with real quarterback play has a chance to be very productive. So I just think the floor is so much higher with Geno. And even if there are people who are going to roll their eyes at the idea of him being a top 10 quarterback, we did this when we talked about the 6 best quarterback show. There is a flatness from like 6 to 15. He's definitively in that grouping conversation. And when you compare that to some of the worst quarterback play in football, it changes everything about your offense. Like going from not starting quarterback play, like not starting level quarterback play, to good quarterback play, no matter where you think he fits in the hierarchy, is the most important thing you can do as an NFL offense. And that is exactly what the Raiders are doing this year.
Yeah, not everybody has to be us and appreciate Geno Smith this much, but even if you think he's like quarterback 17, that's at least like 15 spots higher than they were getting.
It's a massive difference.
Yeah, like you're going from we can't do the offense the way that we want to like, okay, Geno Smith might have his warts, but we can like throw down the field. We can throw into tight windows. We can do some aggressive stuff. We can get the ball to our playmakers without having to just throw Brock Bowers a million screens. And he was great at that, but I would like to expand the Brock Bowers role into a lot more than we're just going to throw our tight end a lot of screens. And the last thing I want to say, and you brought this up, like the whole operation is just going to feel like adults are in the room. And to me, the like kind of corollary I thought of when I was thinking of this was the Jaguars going from Urban Meyer, how just completely childlike and not serious that organization felt, to even just getting Doug Peterson in there in the building. And I know that eventually deteriorated, but Doug Peterson did bring okay, we know how to run a team for a little bit. I have a lot of faith that Pete Carroll is going to level that aspect of it up. So between that and Geno Smith, it just feels like the floor for competency is like way, way shot up from what it was last year.
I mean, yeah, that offense for the Jags in 2022 was like a borderline top 10 offense. If you look at some of the efficiency metrics, like it was a huge step forward just by going from not NFL level coaching to adults in the room. That's a good way to put it.
I was looking at, I think, EPA per game, and I think the Urban Meyer year, they were like 29th. And then, the first Doug Peterson year, by the end, they were like 9th or 10th. That's kind of what I can see with this Raiders team, where they were 31st last year. Obviously, quarterback play had a huge deal in that. But if they're the 9th or 10th best offense this year, I don't think it would be that crazy, especially if Gentry really is the player that we think he can be.
You saying that the running backs were D pluses last year, and me saying it's worse than that. I was in a situation last year in my like long-term keeper fantasy league where I had Zamir White for like nothing. And I was like, well, he's going to be the starting running back. Like I have to keep him. Like it's free. I have to do this. And I hated myself for like the entire first 6 weeks of the season. And that comes on the heels of me stumbling into the Devontae Adams, Jimmy Garoppolo pairing and having to watch that and be invested in every single game. So the amount of pain I've had to endure watching the Las Vegas Raiders over the last 2 seasons on offense, as much as you possibly can if you're not a Raiders fan. So I'm very much looking forward to what this version of it could potentially look like.
Because that one's funny too, because I have the starting running back for X team. Even for bad running games, still does work for like 29 out of 32 offenses in the league every year. Did not work for that Raiders team. Wasn't it?
It was free, and I knew it was a mistake going into it. And the last thing I'll say about this, the offensive line, I know you're a little bit more concerned about it than I am. I think that there's a path for them to be pretty decent. And it was funny when I was watching them at the end of last season and projecting what the starting 5 might look like this year. I liked Jordan Meredith. Like, I actually thought he did some good work as their left guard last season in spot duty. And then coming into this year, I was like, oh, it seems like he's going to get pushed out of the lineup. Like, I actually thought he played pretty well last year. And he's now their starting center, and they moved Jackson Powers Johnson to guard. So that 5 with Meredith, Powers Johnson, Dylan Parham, DJ Glaze, Colton Miller, I think there's at least a path for that group to be okay at points this season where you can build a decent offense around them with better quarterback play, with Gentry, with Bowers. Like it can be the fulcrum of a group and not something that's really pulling you down.
That is actually a little tangent I want to go on. I find it kind of interesting how many teams this offseason went in being like, this guy is going to play center for us. And then a week into it, I think the offensive coordinator was like, I'm good on that, actually. Like Chip Kelly's obviously did it. The Lions did that with trying to get Tate Ratledge in there. I think the Chargers were trying to do a little bit of that with Zion Johnson. Just a lot of teams were like, you know what? We're going to put the other guy in. Even if we think maybe physically he's not as impressive as these other guys, we're going to move the physically impressive guy to guard and let this other guy take over at center.
Yeah, I'm going there next week. I'm going to be there for a Raiders-Niners joint practice in Las Vegas, and I'm curious to chat with some people there just about what that group looks like and how the offensive line has developed over the last year or so and just what they think the offense might be. I know it wasn't a good opening showing in the preseason last night, but I'm not overly worried about that. How you look in preseason game 1 is not something I'm going to overreact to.
How many times have we seen a team look terrible in the preseason?
I can't get there. I just can't get there. All right, here's my second spicy one. You ready? This one's really going to piss you off.
I hope so.
Carolina
I already
Panthers.
know it. Oh, I was going to go a different NFC South offense. You're going to have to sell me. I can't do this.
The Falcons wouldn't be out of nowhere. The Falcons were like a top 10 offense last year.
Yeah, I guess until like the Kirk thing fell. That's a good point. I guess with the quarterback change, I think it was just like you're still trying to sell a new thing, but I guess not really.
Oh, no. The Falcons would have been an extremely cheap one to throw them in there. They were like 6th in success rate last season. That would be way too easy. I'm going with the Carolina Panthers, who were 24th in offensive DVOA last year, but they were 12th in EPA per play over the second half of last season. 12th. You seem disgusted by this. Why are you so anti this take?
I've said it before. I think it's nice that Bryce Young has gone from like potentially out of the league to being somewhat competent, but it just so much of last year to me felt more like he just was getting away with a lot of stuff that I'm
I
not
just
sure we're
could not
going to
disagree
anymore.
more with that. I could not
I don't
disagree
know,
with more
man.
with that. He was let down by the pass catchers
He
so
was.
often last year. So often. And I do think, let's start with the pass catchers first and foremost. I
Mhm.
think what McMillan does to the rest of that group is one of the reasons that I'm really interested in this. Because Xavier Legette, as an ex receiver as a rookie, considering the development curve he was already going to have to be on, it was a losing battle. Like they were not setting him up for success and they knew that, but they didn't have anyone else that they could pop out there. And so they had to play him at X, and he's just not supposed to be in that role. And so now with McMillan, I think you move Leggett into a role within that offense that just makes a ton more sense. Now he can just be like a vertical guy for this team where his lack of nuance and refinement matters so much less because what you're going to be asking of him. And so I think that pairing and just guys being able to play their better roles because of it is something I can get behind. The offensive line, it's a good group. It's a solid group overall, right? Like they've poured a ton of resources into it. And why I actually think it could be better this year is that their run game specifically last season was really vanilla. It was very boring. And it was kind of frustrating, actually. It was a lot of like mid zone from the shotgun. And I'm like, there's not a lot to get excited about here. And one of the reasons that I was particularly frustrated, and before I went there this week, it was one of the things that was kind of holding me back about them, is that it was the same takeaway I had watching the Canales run game in Tampa. And then you compare that to what the Bucks were with Liam Cohen, and you feel how dynamic the 2024 version was. And I do think they're aware of that. And I think some of the simplicity in the run game last year was just a product of year one in the system. So you have these two guards that you've paid a load of money. One of them in Robert Hunt who can really move, and Lewis
Mhm.
who can really move some people. And so I do think we're going to see a more diversified run game from them this year compared to the one we saw last year. And I think they have the players up front to potentially take advantage of that. So if this can be a more dynamic run game with solid running backs behind it, and I do think they have two of those, I just think there's enough here personnel wise going into year two with just some more wrinkles within that system that I don't know, man. Like if I squint, I could see them being like the ninth best offense in the league if some things break right for them.
I I think with Canales, I think overall, I think he's a nice play caller, but with the run game, like he's got to show it to me first. I'm
That's
not
fair.
doing any of the. I can't buy
It's
in
all
before
projection.
I see it.
Every bit of this is projection.
Yeah, and to be fair, like they do have offensive linemen that, like you're saying, in theory, if they wanted to do more gap stuff, it would make a lot of sense. It's just that was also kind of true in Tampa, and they didn't really do a lot of it. Obviously, the center was different, so maybe that hurt them a little bit. But
But again, that
I don't
was
know,
year
man.
one. He was only there for 1 year. And so
That's
going
fair.
from year one to year two and being able to build on some of the core stuff and iterate, he didn't even have a chance to do that in Tampa. He's been the offensive coordinator twice, and he started over both times. So if you're trying to build a case, I do think that there is a case to be built.
Here's my other thing with why I think I struggle with this a little bit. If I were to imagine like what the top 10 offenses next year look like, I who is whoever the best player on the Panthers offense is the worst best player among any of the other top 10 units. Like unless Tedero and McMillan is like Malik Neighbors level good, they just who is their superstar that feels like they can carry a top 10 offense? I think that's where I struggle. I do get like the
Yeah.
down to down with the run game. I think Bryce Young, you have found some more consistency in the passing game. I think the ceiling, again, unless he really is just Mike Evans out of the gate, McMillan, I'm talking about, it's hard for me to see who is the ceiling raiser.
I get that. It's actually a really good argument. I'm trying
Yeah,
to find like an analogous case that I can use to make my point here.
Yeah, now I would need to see like who were exactly were the top 10 offenses last year.
Okay.
Like who
All
is
right,
the
here.
worst skill
Okay.
player in all of those?
Okay. So here, the team that I think is the best case here, and I do think that you could poke some holes in this. It'd be like an Arizona Cardinals-esque path.
I don't hate that, but even then, the quarterback I think just has higher. It's I think
I,
that's where it comes
so
down
I
to
think
me.
this is part of it. I think so. If I were you, I'll argue against myself here. Trey
Okay.
McBride is definitely better than any of the skill
Yeah,
position players
Trey
on the
McBride is.
Panthers, right? Like,
I
but I do think collectively, 1 to 4 or 5, there's better depth at the skill position talent for Carolina if McMillan is a hit. Because you have Leggett, who has pedigree. Coker was decent last year. You have Thielen. I think there are more options within the passing game for Carolina, even if the high-end guys aren't as quite as high-end as the Cardinals do. And if they add a more diversified run game, I think the offensive line talent for the Panthers is better than the offensive line talent for Arizona. The part where we're never going to be on the same page here is the quarterback.
It's the
and I
quarterback.
think that's
Yeah.
at the core of this, is that I believe in him, I think, more than you believe in him.
I believe in him insofar as like he can stick around now. I just don't know if I believe in him insofar as he can help lead a top 10 offense. I think I struggle with that part a little bit of it. I do agree with the depth of, I think, the pass catchers, though, because Arizona was very top heavy. It was like, you had your 2 stars, obviously, and then Michael Wilson is fine. And then after that, you were kind of holding on to your hat slot. Carolina does, in theory, have like 4 workable receivers. And then, honestly, the tight end room, there's no stars, but like, I kind of liked Jatavian Sanders was a player I hated in college, but as a rookie, I was like, I don't know, man. He's kind of got a little bit of shit to him.
So I think that's a very good thing to bring up because they're excited about him heading into this year. He got banged up in the middle of last year, which I think really kind of threw some stuff off. And he's a little bit slimmer. I think he's going to be a real big part of their passing game. And I think he allows them to do some really cool stuff. I know I was there at practice. They were lining him up as like the isolated receiver and going like some 1-by-3 stuff with the wideouts. Like, I do think that he's going to allow them to add a couple cool layers to their passing game. And I believe in Bryce Young. And I just think that his comfort level within the offense, the amount of ownership he's now going to have with some stuff at the line of scrimmage, I do believe that we could see him maintain something close to the level of play that we saw last year. Anticipation and aggressiveness, if that's at the core of who you are as a passer, and that's what we saw from Bryce Young last year, I can get behind it. Like, if that is at the core of who you are, I can get behind it. And he has both of those things.
So I don't even necessarily disagree with that. I just think the third tenet to that is arm talent. And he just doesn't have enough of it for me to sustain that level of play, where I think when you don't have the arm for it, you're kind of inviting a lot of volatility. And I think for as much as his receivers let him down last year, there were some DBs dropping some easy ones last year that if that turns, I don't know.
Do you think Bryce Young has like demonstrably worse arm talent than Brock Purdy?
I think Brock can get the ball to like I think Brock's arm is, but I wouldn't say demonstrably different, but I would say it's a little bit worse.
Because I think that to me is like the best case scenario.
That's I can actually see that as like him being something akin to Brock Purdy.
And the reason that I make that connection, and again, and just talking to people about this, his ability to see and access the middle of the field for a smaller player, really the only other guy that I think falls into that same bucket with the way that they play is Brock Purdy. I think they're both kind of similar in that regard in how they try to work that level of the field as smaller quarterbacks, and they do it with anticipation and trust. And so I think he can overcome some of the arm talent deficiencies because of the way that he plays in some of these areas. So listen, they were like a bottom 6 offense last year. Like, this is not you're having to tell yourself a story to get there. I just think this is one of the groups where I'm like, all right, I can get behind some of this if you believe in the quarterback.
I can see. What I will say is I've come around on Brock Purdy now, but it did take like 30 games for me to finally start to buy it. Whereas with Bryce Young, we got 6 or 7 really at the end there where he looked decent. So maybe with another dozen so games, I could start to buy in. But until then, I don't know, man.
There's one more offense that I was going to throw out. This, again, feels like one of the cheap ones, but a team going from like outside of the top 16 to the top 10, like the Jags could easily do it this year. I mean,
I didn't want to do the bit. I mean, come on.
I mean, we don't have to talk about it at length, but that was like the last of my 5 where I was like, we'll throw them in here because, again, if the Jags were the 9th best offense in the league this season, no one would be shocked. I'm sure a lot of people would. I would not be shocked by that if that's how it ended up shaking out. I think that they have the receiving talent. The quarterback gives them a baseline level of play. They would have to overcome the offensive line. But if they can scheme around it well enough, I think that path is there for them, even if it might not be likely.
Absolutely. And like it's all of the stuff that we've talked about with Cohen and you add Travis Hunter and all that stuff. But also, I think the other element of it is that quietly, they weren't that bad last year.
They were
Like it
17th.
just, yeah, they were only 17th. And that was like some of that, even in the early parts of the season, was like before Brian Thomas Jr. really became Brian Thomas Jr. And then obviously, Mac Jones had to play like the second half of the season. There was just, I think it felt more gross to watch than like the actual efficiency was. And sometimes you have offenses that are the opposite. Like the opposite of that was the Vikings. That offense was awesome to watch, but like realistically, they weren't that much better. It's just that like when you have the ceiling of Justin Jefferson, it makes it feel a lot more better. So they weren't as bad as it feels like they were. And also they've made enough of the improvements that like I can sell myself on the Jaguars for the 800th time.
Yeah, no more Jags talk. But I think we had to mention them.
That's
as
why
a
I
team
didn't
that
even want to
potentially fits this. Let's get to defenses. This one was actually harder for me. I think defenses in general should be easier, but it was harder for me to come up with 5 teams that I felt, or however many teams, that I felt like really good about. Who was your first defense that you think could be like an out of nowhere top 10 unit this year?
Oh, I don't feel good about most of these. I feel like I'm having to swing for the fences on a lot of them. So I will take the one that I've kind of hinted at before that I do feel at least the most okay with. And again, this one is cheating because for a long time they did have a good defense. The 49ers, like I've talked about, like
Interesting. They were not on my list.
I'm buying the front, dude. I'm buying that. It's not. Here's the thing.
All right. Wait. What? You're just saying that like it should be taken as a given. You're buying like Nick Bosa and the kids? Like this is all rookies. You think all the rookies are just going to fix their problems immediately?
So yes and no. I really, really think Mykel Williams can come in and be like very good.
Mykel Williams,
I
like Mykel Williams too, but
I don't know. But the thing is, like, when Mykel Williams, one, I like him, but also he's playing opposite Nick Bosa. I think to me that sets him up to be in a pretty good spot. I also think last year especially, and even kind of the year before, I think the Niners really struggled with a little bit of an identity crisis in terms of what they actually wanted to be up front and how they wanted to call some of this stuff. I think just going back to Robert Saleh, even if I do still think they have too many light bodies, particularly at defensive tackle, Saleh to me is at least a guy who knows how to weaponize that in a way that I think they struggled to really put together the last couple of years. So you add that on top of, again, I really like Mykel Williams. Fred Warner hopefully will be healthier. Like last year, he was still good. He's Fred Warner, but he was playing, I think, on like a busted ankle for a lot of the season and just wasn't fully healthy. And so if he's back at peak play again, I think that's going to go a long way. The secondary, I think, honestly, more than the front is where I think you have to squint a little bit. But I don't know. For whatever reason, I'm kind of buying some of this stuff. They're saying it like Upton Stout and stuff like that. Maybe I'm like way too in the back for it, but I'm into it. I don't know.
The secondary is where you have to squint to see it. The front has all rookies.
They'll be fine.
They're just
Saleh's going to tell them to go
here.
forward, and they're going to go forward. It'll be fine.
I think there are so many questions here. I absolutely think there's a path for them to be like an acceptable defense again. And if the offense is very good, which I think it has the capability of being, this can still be like an 11-win playoff team. Like I think that's probably where I would lean overall. There's so many questions I still have about the defense. And maybe my biggest question, and this has come up a lot as I've talked to defensive coordinators from that schematic tree even over the course of this trip, is just how you're thinking about diversification as we get into this world where I think teams have a really good understanding of how to pick on these 4-down teams. Teams they've had a tried and true playbook they've been able to develop for when you're one of these 4-down teams, there's really no front diversification. We know how to go after you. When you're the Texans, and as one offensive coach put it to me, you have all those creatures up front, you can get by playing that way. When you don't have that level of front talent, I think that the simplicity of it starts to play against you. And that's my biggest question about Robert Saleh is without a bunch of talent up front here, what does this unit look like, especially against the run? If they don't try to find a couple different ways to approach this and a couple of wrinkles on top of it, is the simplicity going to be something that people can pick on because there aren't defined stars here? There's potential, but there are not defined stars here anymore.
I mean, I think that that's totally fair. And again, to get to that world, you really do have to believe that Mykel Williams can basically have like the Jared Verse type of rookie season, which is
I
definitely
just don't
asking.
see that. I think he
I
can
think
be a
that's
really
fair.
solid
I
run defender from day one, but I just don't think he plays with that level of violence. I know he was banged up last year, but when I watched Jared Verse in college, like it was real violence, and
Yeah.
that's just not how Mykel Williams plays. I think he's going to be a solid run defender from the start, and I think the combination of him and Bryce Huff situationally, you can build a really nice secondary edge spot. But I think combined with all of the uncertainty in the interior, I think you're shooting for let's try to get by with this group, not let's dictate games with this group.
I don't know. Maybe I still think Nick Bosa at his best can really still be that level of player. And if Mykel Williams is 80% of the quality that we got from Jared Verse, I think that might be enough. I'm definitely asking a lot of the not Fred Warner, Nick Bosa players in this defense, which was the mistake I think a lot of us made last year. But I really just it to me just feels like getting Robert Saleh in the building, and them I think having a better understanding of who these players are, and really drafting in a way that feels very pointed to the defense they want to. Whereas I think over the last couple of years they struggled with that personnel wise. It just feels like the floor is going to be a little bit higher, and then if their two best players are who we believe they can be and can be healthy. Again, I'm saying like back half of the top 10. I'm saying like squeak in 9th or 10th. But given that they were like 22nd or 23rd last year, that would go a long way for this team, especially if, we don't have to talk about the offense, but if they're who we think they are, this team is really, really good again.
The floor is a good term to bring up because there are going to be teams I mention here that I think have a chance to like surprise people. I think there are teams I'm going to mention here that I believe have a lower floor than the 49ers do. Like if the Niners were the 27th best defense in the league, I'd be very surprised. Other teams here, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. If that makes sense. Like I think there's more variance
like
with
it
some of
could
the teams
go
we're going to
either
talk
way
about here.
depending on-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we'll talk about why in a second. But I think the Niners, if they were the 27th best defense in the league, I'd be surprised. But if they were the 7th best defense in the league, I would also be surprised. I just think that there's probably a narrower path for them.
I think that's fair, because even though I do think the floor is raised, again, unless Mykel Williams is Jared Verse, the ceiling probably isn't any better than it's been the past couple of years.
Well, you mentioned Jared Verse. I'm going to get to that team here in a little bit. The first one I'm throwing out there, one that I think is kind of cheap here because they were already pretty good according to some advanced metrics last year. My first one is the Arizona Cardinals. Like, I think the Cardinals absolutely have a path to be a top 10 defense this year. Per like DVOA projections, they have them as a top 10 defense this year. So this isn't even that spicy of a take if you look at some of the underlying numbers. They were 16th in EPA per play over the second half of last season. They finished 14th in defensive DVOA. I just think the ideas that have driven this Cardinals defense are fascinating, and I'm so interested to see what those ideas look like filtered through better players. And where they land on that, I think, is one of my biggest questions, period, about any team. Like, stylistically, what do the Cardinals try to be with an increase in talent? Because if you look at what they've been trotting out over the last couple of years, especially up front, there's just a lot left to be desired. And then coming into this year, they're adding, like, for like, let's say at least half the season. Here are the players that the Cardinals are adding to their defensive front. Josh Sweat, who they signed in free agency, Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, BJ Ojolari, who was hurt last year, Darius Robinson, who was hurt for a huge chunk of his rookie season, and Walter Nolan, who they drafted in the first round.
They basically revamped the whole thing. Yeah.
Yes, it's 6 guys. The only guys that they're carrying over are essentially as like these starters, like frontline starters, and he may not even be considered this anymore, is kind of Zaven Collins and kind of Baron Browning, who are now more situational because of the players that they've added. And they drafted Jordan Birch in the 3rd round. Like, we're looking at 7 new pieces as part of this defensive line rotation for the Cardinals.
This was the most got something out of like actually nothing defense that we got last year. Like similar to the first year of like kind of Brian Flores almost, where it's like, okay, there's maybe one decent guy in the back end here, but for the most part, they're getting a lot out of basically nothing. And Zaven Collins, I think, is like the perfect example of that, because they drafted him to be an off-ball player last year, or maybe even a little bit the year before, realized that, okay, he's like a 6'4", 250-pound. He looks like Donta Hightower. Let's just put him on the edge, and we're going to ask him to defend the run and push the pocket a little bit. And he could do some of that. It's just that, like, that's a cool idea and a nice player to stumble on. But when he was like, I don't know, their third or fourth best, like most productive player last year, that's not a good spot to be in. So now that he gets like bumped way down the totem pole, I think that that's really nice for them. What's funny about the Cardinals defense is, for as much as I admire a lot of stuff that they were doing, they were very much a defense that like every play was either the best or worst thing that could happen. There was
let's dig into that.
They were 31st in defensive success rate last year, which makes it crazy that they finished not that close to that in terms of like EPA per play and stuff like that.
My favorite stat about that, and we'll get into some of that because it's incredibly important, is against the run. They were 31st in explosive run rate allowed last year. They were 8th in percentage of opponent runs that went for 0 or negative yards. It was all or nothing. Like, that was the Arizona Cardinals defense last year. So when we say there are a lot of interesting ideas with this defense, I think there are a couple different things to throw out. But at the front of that, to me, is the stuff they were doing with their 3 safeties. And when I say 3 safeties, Garrett Williams, who's their nickel, was a safety in a lot of the looks that the Cardinals were trotting out. And so they have these defenses on early downs where it's a penny front, so 5 down linemen, 1 off-ball linebacker, 2 corners, 3 safeties. And why they like that for a variety of reasons. But why that is so effective for them compared to other teams is that they have Budda Baker. And every team likes to say, we're building the defense through our players. This system is a perfect expression of Budda Baker's talent for 2 different reasons. One, he's the one getting a lot of these free hitter looks at the line of scrimmage. Like, he's the one with a lot of these TFLs. He was 3rd in the NFL among all defensive backs in TFLs last year. The 2 guys ahead of him were Roger McCreary and Mike Hilton, who played on the line of scrimmage as nickelbacks. He plays 10 yards deep into the defensive backfield, and he's still 3rd in the league. And so what that does is, with those 3 high safeties, offenses don't know where he's going to be in the run fit. So you're not accounting for him. And so that's why they were able to get him as a free hitter a lot. And the other part of it is, when you have those 3 guys in the back end, you can do anything you want with disguise. And it's not even just the structure when it comes to like, oh, is it cover 3? Is it cover 2? Some of these 3 safety looks that Spags uses specifically, the guy dropping down as one of those safeties, he's often like the pole runner player in cover 2. Well, the Cardinals, Budda can be like 6 different things. And so there's just so much murkiness because of the looks that they're playing in with those 3 safety shells. And so those are the benefits of them. And I think they'll still do a lot of that because they believe in the benefits of them. But I think they'll get simpler in other situations. The biggest issue for this team last year is that they were 31st in the NFL in success rate on first down. So they were just never in defined passing situations. And I think when they get to those this year, when it's 2nd and 9, way more often than it's 2nd and 5, you're going to see them in 4 down fronts where they want those highly paid, highly drafted guys to just go eat the same way they did with Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia. So I think they'll be a little bit less weird this year, but I still think they'll be weird enough to take advantage of it with better players.
That's specifically about the first down, like a really good point too, because I do think if you had to point to like what was the strength of the roster last year, it was the secondary. Like, Budda Baker, is a great player. Garrett Williams, I think, really showed up for them. Max Melton was a rookie, but like had his moments, and I understand why they are maybe a little bit, kind of high on him and want him to be a really good player. So like the secondary was good. It's just like you said, well, if you're always in 2nd and 3, I mean, the offense just doesn't really have to interact with any of that. And so I think that hurt them. The Budda Baker thing is funny. I'm so glad you mentioned the way that his role operates, because one, them just structurally being a 3 safety defense does mess with the way that offenses are perceiving like where he's going to be. But he's also one of the few players who in the NFL gets like true freedom sometimes.
Yes.
Like he's just walking around sometimes. Like you just kind of like hanging out like, where do I think the ball is going to be? There's a little bit of like truly like Troy Polamalu type of, I'll find the ball.
But I love that. I love
awesome.
Because so
he's
many teams give lip service to this idea of like, oh yeah, we're going to really build it through our players. And then you see something like this and it truly is built through the players. And I think the secondary talent, losing Star Thomas, who's like was important cornerback depth for them, he's out for the season, I believe. That's something worth noting because now you essentially are counting on Will Johnson from day one. But I think they'll be okay even doing that. And I'm with you on Max Melton. He's a year 2 outside corner. I think he has a chance to take a step. And even beyond Budda, Jalen Thompson is a nice player. And I think Garrett Williams, in the versatile role they have him in, is a nice player. So I really like the secondary. Obviously, we talked about the front. And the last thing worth mentioning here, which I think is just a cool philosophical discussion. Jonathan Gannon, when he was in Philly, they ran one of the simplest defenses in the NFL. It was incredibly simple. And I think in his bones, that's kind of what he wants to do. Like he wants to run a pretty simple defense. And I have so much respect for somebody in the head coaching chair with a specialization on one side of the ball that empowers his assistants to really do what they think is best. And him really loosening his grip and empowering Nick Rallis, their defensive coordinator, to do all of this wonky, that takes a lot of humility, and I just don't think a lot of coaches would be willing to do that, and I think the Cardinals have benefited because of it. And where they fall kind of on the spectrum between what Gannon values and what Rallis values this year, I'm really curious to see what it is, but because of that history and because of how good that relationship has been, I trust where they're going to land between those two poles.
That's a really interesting point, and like part of it with Gannon, at least obviously in his last stop before Arizona, is like, well, it's easy to be simple when your front is that good, the way that it was in Philly, and that's why they've thrown 6 bodies at it. Exactly, that's why they're just like, every resource we have, we'll pay guys in free agency, we'll get veterans, we'll get young guys, everything it takes. If we can get something akin to that, that's what we want.
Yeah, only the Eagles played with lighter boxes last season. And so in order to play that way and hold up against the run, eventually you do need better players. You can do as much weird as you want. You do need guys in order to hold up that way. And I think they have some guys this year. All right, what's your next potential out of nowhere defense you got for me?
This one I feel the stinkiest about, not in terms of how far they have to go to get into the top 10, just like, I don't really like betting on the logo on the side of the helmet for this team, but I think I'm kind of going to do it anyway. And I think if they literally played under any other logo, we would feel differently about them. The Colts defense might be kind of good. Like,
wow, I did not anticipate you saying that. I thought you were going with another team there.
So first of all, they weren't that bad last year. They were like the 17th. I mean, that's what Gus Bradley does, right? He's going to get you to dead average, and that's what they were. So they were like the 17th best defense last year. And I think why I like bring up all the logo stuff is I think with how much, at least I personally still believe in Lou Anarumo. And then when I think of them signing some of the biggest ticket secondary guys in this free agency class, Charvarius Ward, Cam Bynum, who I think can be really good players. And then if you just look at some of the front talent, the pedigree of those guys, DeForest Buckner, when he has some help, is still one of the best defensive tackles in the league. Laiatu Latu was a first-round pick who had he was overshadowed by Jared Verse, obviously, but he had a pretty solid rookie season. And then they have like pretty good depth behind him. Not a lot of superstars, but just they have waves of pass rushers if they need to get to it. And then Grover Stewart is one of the best noses in the league still. It's just like, I think if we removed how stinky we feel about the Colts in general because of the quarterback situation and all of that, I kind of think that this would be a team that would be a lot easier to buy in on. It's just the aesthetics of it don't feel that great.
I think I can get on board with most of that. The first thing I would say that I'm worried about is that second cornerback spot. Justin Wally, who was a third-round pick for them, was looking like he was going to be a starter opposite of Charvarius Ward. He tore his ACL on Thursday, and so he's going to be out for the season. So now we're already digging into that same cornerback depth that has been an issue with this team over the last couple of years. So that's not a great note on which to start. For me, it's about how much of a step can that front take this year, right? Can Latu become like a real difference maker? Can getting Ebukam back and having some of that pass rushing depth become a strength of this team? You know, we'll see what happens with, at this point, I'm like kind of past expecting Kwity Paye to take a big step forward as a pass rusher, but he's a useful player, right? But if Latu can become like a true ace and you can rely on the depth and the secondary can come together, I think this group has a pretty decent floor. I think the front and how much of a difference they're making down to down will determine the ceiling.
That's definitely a lot of it for me. Like, I'm banking on, not Latu being some all-pro or something, but jumping up to where he could, be like a 10-sack-ish guy. So I'm baking in a little bit of development there. And then I also think because of the way that Anarumo will call a defense, where I think he's better at calling games and like throwing different types of pressure packages and sims and stuff than a guy like Gus Bradley was, I think that makes it easier to kind of weaponize a defense that has a lot of okay 2s and 3s types of pass rushers. Like, that's what we've seen from Mike McDonald for the longest time, right? And I think Mike McDonald obviously does that better than Anarumo. But if that's what they want to tap into, like, when you already have the the pocket pusher like DeForest Buckner, who's going to give you some real firepower from the middle. If the other guys off the edge can just be, you bring waves and bring the correct pressure packages, I can see why this would be a pretty decent defense.
It's funny. I did not have them on my radar, but I understand where you're coming from with all of this. Like, I don't disagree with it.
They were the last team I put on because it's like, with all of these other teams that we're bringing up, there's like one very obvious thing that makes you excited about why you want to buy into it. Like with the Cardinals, it's like, okay, well, they threw a million things at the front and signed maybe the best pass rusher that you could get in free agency and all this stuff. With the Colts, it's a lot of like, okay, they signed the free agent corners and the free agent safety, but there's nothing that really speaks to you. But the more I just looked at the collective picture, I was like, again, if they didn't have the Colts on the side of their helmet, I think this would be an easier team to buy in on.
It's funny because when you said that about the helmet and the logo, the team I thought you were going to go with is one of the teams that I had kind of in my like short list. It was the Giants.
Oh, okay. I thought about them because I get it with the pass rush, but they're more of like, they got to prove it to me type of defense.
I'm also there, but I'm
Okay.
at least open to the idea that they could take a huge leap forward. Like the pass rushing talent, if Abdul Carter is really good from day one, which I'm open to, it's very good. Like if Brian Burns is now your second best edge rusher and Kayvon Thibodeau is your third best edge rusher, and you still have Dexter Lawrence, and you bring in a guy like Abdul Carter into the mix, I'm open to the thought that this could be a really, really good pass rush. And then similar to the Colts, they've paid to fix parts of the secondary. I'd still be worried about that second outside corner spot, but now you have Javon Holland in the mix. If Paulson Adebo does hit, I think that there's at least a timeline where this can be a back half of the top 10 defense that is driven by the pass rush.
If the corner situation is not a disaster, I can see it. Because, we've kind of expressed like, I get why, Paulson Adebo might help them, but I kind of understand some of the concerns that you have about like how he might not be as surefire of a bet as they want him to be. And then there's already kind of been reports out of camps that like Deonte Banks doesn't really have the outside corner spot anymore. And so if like your first round pick from a couple years ago doesn't solidly have the spot, that to me leaves a lot of influx there. I really do like the safeties and the nickel spot though. Like Drew Phillips is a solid player. Javon Holland, to me, I love that fit, especially if he's going to be healthier. And Tyler Nubin is like, I think athletically he's never going to be a star player, but he'll put his there, man. Like he's a very aggressive player downhill. I like him.
I think the secondary absolutely could be decent at the very least. And if the front can be a group that really dictates how games go, I would not be shocked if this was a good defense. I'm very much still in wait and see mode. Like I'm not actually predicting that they will be, but I thought they were at least worth mentioning in an exercise like this. Did you have one more?
I do have one more, and this is the one that I feel the most. They have to cover a lot of ground to get into the top 10, but I kind of might do the thing again with the New England Patriots defense. I think they could be like kind of good.
I knew you were going to do this.
I thought when I went into this argument, I was going to do New England Patriots offense, but they've actually been one more that I sit with it for a lot of the offseason I kind of struggle with. When I think about the defense, though, one, it's a little bit of what we talked about earlier with like the Raiders, where the Gerard Mayo thing was such a disaster for a lot of reasons that I think just going from that to someone who I believe that we can all think can raise the floor in Mike Vrabel, I think that goes a long way. They also, just in terms of personnel last year, Barmore wasn't playing, and obviously we don't know what we're going to get from him this year, but for him to just not be playing at all last year, I think hurt them a lot. Juwan Bentley missed basically all of last year, and I think he was a really important piece for them beforehand. Kyle Duggar was a little bit up and down in terms of injuries. And then to me, the big one is, I know old corner is a bad thing to bet on, but Carlton Davis is like miles better than anyone else that they were putting out there on the outside last year.
As a short-term bet,
yes,
it could absolutely work out.
That's what I'm doing here. I'm making the short-term bet that for this year, he's going to be fine. So yeah, will he be there for the Super Bowl window that they want in 3 years, 2 years? I don't know. Maybe not. But for this year, I'm pretty excited about him next to Christian Gonzalez, who I believe is like, I don't know, man. If I had to rank him, probably the third best corner in the league, maybe fourth. Like I think he's a star.
When you were talking, I wanted to pull up the just snap counts for the 2024 New England Patriots defense. just to
It's not
talk
good.
about some of the guys they had up front. So Keion White played 830 snaps last year. I still think Keion White has like a real ceiling as a player. He took a
He's
step
very good.
back over the course of last season, but I think that was in part because he was the only guy they had along that defensive front. Some of the other guys on the defensive front for the Patriots last year that got at least 400 snaps. Anthony Jennings, who's not giving you anything as a pass rusher. We know that. Daniel Ukele, who had 723 snaps last year. Devon Godshaw had 680 snaps last year. Jeremiah Farms Jr. had 457 snaps last year. And then Dietrich Wise had 409. Again, not giving you a ton of juice as a pass rusher. Adding Milton Williams and Christian Barmore next to Keion White, I feel a lot better about that. A lot better about it. And I do think that there is a chance because of that, we see a guy in Keion White closer to what we had over the first chunk of last season compared to him slowing down over the back half of last season.
They just have more pop than they would have last year. I also think, like, in terms of just adding a little bit more depth to the defensive line and stuff too, like, I kind of like the Kyrus Tonga signing. You know, he's only a guy you want to play for like 12, 15 snaps a game as a run defender, but I actually think he's solid. And then even another issue that defense had was obviously the front wasn't very good for a lot of the season, but then the guys behind them also weren't giving them a whole lot. Like, you know, Jelani Tavai, I think, took a step back. Obviously, I said Bentley hadn't been playing. I think bringing in Robert Spillane, who not an all-pro type of linebacker, but like, he's going to go up and hit a guard. He's going to take space back. You can do something with him in coverage, where I just think they lacked any of that last year.
And Christian Gonzalez obviously banged up, or was banged up early in training camp, but he's going to be a really good player. And him and Carlton Davis is a real cornerback duo. And so I could absolutely see it with this group. And Barmore coming back, I think, is a huge part of it, along with Milton Williams. Like, if that interior pass rush can be a defiant strength and like one of the better ones in the league, I don't think that's crazy to imagine if Barmore can come back at full strength.
And that's why, like, because we talked about some of these units, right, where it's like maybe the floor isn't higher, but you can sell yourself on the ceiling. I think with this defense, I can kind of get myself there on both because of the Vrabel aspect, just being like a more solid head coach, and then the ceiling of players like Carlton Davis, like Milton Williams, hopefully Barmore being back. It's just top 10. I know that's a lot of ground to cover, but I don't know. I do feel like they're going to be not nearly as embarrassing as they were last year.
We've also never seen Terrell Williams as a defensive coordinator. I think that's worth at least throwing
scary.
out. The fact that it's a year one defensive coordinator is just, I think, one more thing to keep in mind with that group. All right, three more I want to throw out here very quickly. The Rams absolutely could do it. If
they felt cheap. They felt like the one
Yeah.
everyone's doing, so I didn't want to.
I mean, if you have, and this is how I would approach something like this, same way I felt about the Giants. If you have a top 5 to 6 front, the volatility on the back end, you could easily stumble into it. And that's where the Rams are. Like, the Rams are potentially have one of the best fronts in football. And if the secondary sort of figures it out, there is a path for them to be a top 10 defense. Two others that I think, just when you look at the underlying numbers, I feel like they're prone for a bounce back, like prime for a bounce back. I would throw the Bears out there. Again, there are elements of this that worry me. Jalen Johnson being hurt and potentially not even being ready for the start of the season has me feeling like itchy, but Jaquan Brisker being back is huge. I think that no stars on the defensive line that they added this offseason, but I think they have a lot more depth now than they did last year. Like, having Grady Jarrett, having Deo Odengbo there, I feel much better about the floor of that group, even if I think they lack like a high-end difference maker. And then you look at the numbers last year, they were dead last in explosive play rate allowed. Like, they were 14th in defensive success rate last season. So I think if they get a little bit luckier, there's absolutely a scenario where they're like a back half of the top 10 defense. And then one that I think is actually pretty cheap, the Browns. Like,
yeah.
I mean, the Browns
Them
were,
and the Jets, I think of the same way, where it's just like
the Browns
you
were a
could get there.
historically good defense last year. And do you know where the Browns ranked in defensive success rate last season? In 2025.
Hit me.
4th.
What, really? Was it just all
Yes.
explosive plays over Martin Emerson's head?
31st in explosive play rate allowed. 31st.
Okay.
And they only had 12 turnovers last year. They only created 12 turnovers, which was 30th in the NFL. They had 28 the year before that. And so even if that gets back to average, there are questions about this team personnel-wise, right? The Martin Emerson thing absolutely has to be mentioned. They're going to pop Greg Newsome outside. They're going to try to get by with like Cam Mitchell in the nickel. That concerns me. I still think that they have solid but unspectacular players at most of the other defensive line positions. I think they've got a lot of decent players. Isaiah McGuire, Alex Wright, Mason Graham as a rookie, but that might be enough with Myles Garrett to still have a very good pass rush. And I think the secondary, even without Emerson, can be pretty good. So I think they're going to be able to play a little bit less man without Emerson. They're going to have to sort through that. But I think they are the sort of team, when you look at the underlying numbers with it, that is prone for a pretty big bounce. I keep saying prone, is prime for a pretty big bounce back here.
I could definitely see that with the Browns. They were one of those, like, I think there were a few teams that I maybe wanted to pick, but just didn't know what to do with. And the Browns were definitely one of them, where it's like, well, I think by the nature of the way that they play, being a little bit more of an aggressive, volatile defense, sometimes you just have those bad years. And so that's why I was like, okay, well, if they just, again, get back to average, and then Myles Garrett's Myles Garrett, they could absolutely do it. So that could happen. I kind of thought of the Jets that way. And then the Bears were another one where, because for the first 7 weeks of the season, they kind of were a top 10 defense, I was well, I feel like they already are that unit. And then just a million things imploded for them that I was just like, I almost don't even feel like the second half of the season was that real for them. That's kind of how I felt about the Jets defense too. I didn't want to pick them because, like, I still kind of think they're good. It's just they kind of all, it just all fell apart once they fired Saleh.
My issue with the Jets is, especially up front, they are terrifyingly thin.
It's
terrifyingly thin. Right now, Jermaine Johnson's still hurt. Jermaine Johnson's not practicing yet. So it's Michael Clemens and Will McDonald. And if their defensive tackles, other than Quinnen Williams, even like right now, I'm staring at the RLAS depth chart right now. Byron Cowart is penciled in as the starter next to Quinnen Williams. And even if it's not him, it's going to be like Derek Nottie. And so there are just enough fragile parts of that depth chart that I feel a little bit less enthusiastic about that group.
Yeah, that's fair. They've had a little bit of the, I mean, it's funny that Saleh was there, but like the arc that the Niners had a couple of years ago, where it's like, well, 3 years ago, the front was insane. Now some of the faces are still there, but it's Quinnen Williams is their Nick Bosa. But other than that, it's kind of deteriorated.
Yeah, I mean, Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, like those guys are good players. They're ascending players, but there's enough fragility with the interior defensive line specifically that I'm like, that one worries me a tiny bit. That's all we've got for today. We'll be back with several more shows this week. I think we're going to have 2 training camp mailbags again, because we have multiple beat writer conversations that we're having over the next week or so. Very much looking forward to that. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching The Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.